Okay, great. So in keeping with the topic today, I'm going to talk about mobile adoption and specifically what are the challenges India is facing in terms of usage and how do we work together as a broader ecosystem of partners in order to drive adoption. So this is an interesting research that we did at InMobi where country by country globally we tried to understand what are the media consumption and mobile consumption patterns that are happening. And what you'll see on this chart is there's a strong inverse correlation between wealth and mobile centricity. So for example, if you look in the lower right, you see India there along with a lot of the emerging markets where the mobile centricity is very high relative to the relative wealth of the nation. So we define mobile centricity in this case by a couple of key variables. So what is the relative importance of mobile in media consumption? What is the comfort level of users in transacting through their devices? And also, what is the breadth and depth of mobile usage and activity? And then finally, what is the mobile influence on offline and online purchasing? So if you take in all those variables, we said, broadly, if you look at mobile centricity, you see this correlation. I think most of you, this shouldn't be a big surprise because in most emerging markets, the PC revolution has been passed over for mobile directly. So from an infrastructure perspective, these are very mobile-first economies. So I'm going to talk about the key trends that are happening today here in India and also globally as it relates to mobile adoption. So for all of you in this room, the number one year that everyone in the mobile industry is looking forward to is next year, which is 2013. And the reason is both globally as well as in India, this is when the expectation that the internet traffic that's going to be happening globally is going to be surpassed by users going through their mobile device to access the web versus desktop. So that's a dramatic transition. You guys can see it on the chart here, where as desktop internet traffic goes down, mobile has gone up dramatically. Now what's interesting is in India, it's actually technically already happened. This year, but the data right now also includes traffic from data cards. So if you're talking about purely traffic going to the internet from mobile devices, it's actually going to start kind of beginning of next year. So this is a key year for us trend-wise across the industry. The other key trend I want to talk about, and you guys obviously must be seeing this across the board, which is the explosion of connected devices. In economies like India, you're not going to see it as accelerating as quickly until the price points come down. But beyond the kind of smartphone revolution we all know about, you're seeing this huge growth in tablet adoption, other forms and form factors of hardware that are portable and mobile. So this is a huge trend. And what you're seeing is the kinds of consumption behaviors one does on smartphone relative to, say, a tablet is different. So on tablets in India, we have research that shows that people do a lot more banking, they do a lot more business communication, and then they also do a lot more shopping. I want to share with you guys some key data for India. So if you kind of look at this inverted pyramid, this is very interesting and telling in terms of the adoption. So the total Indian population is roughly 1.2 billion. Of that, the mobile subscriber base is about 929 million. And the actual capable of internet access of that subscriber base is 449 million. And then when we find out how many actually access the mobile web at least once, it's 120 million, which is a huge drop from the 449. And then when you go further down and say how many of them are active users, i.e. they regularly access the mobile web, then it's about 60 million. And then of that 60 million, about 11 million are coming out of smartphone. So when you look at this pyramid, there's some good news and bad news. So the bad news is, particularly if you look in this middle of that pyramid, that's telling you less than 15% of potential users are actually using and accessing the internet through their phone. And I'm going to talk about why and the challenges of why that's happening. The good news is if you look at all these numbers relative to, say, just a year ago or 5 years ago, the acceleration and growth across all this has been tremendous. So specifically with cheaper smartphones, and I'll talk more about that with the advent of Android, but then also as you're seeing now with 3G in India, and as that kind of evolves over the next few years, you'll see that all these numbers should be accelerating dramatically. So what's going on? What's causing all these numbers? So the key trend is that there's three things that are coming together. And what's coming together is content, the cloud, and connection and connectivity. And with that, all of that is helping drive mobile adoption and usage. So first, let me talk about the connectivity piece. So what we're seeing is a huge demand growing for smartphones, eventually connected devices and tablets in India, and a dramatic decline in feature phone demand. And the reason's simple, right? The kind of information, the capabilities and the utility you can do on a smartphone is significantly higher. The other key trend that's driving this is the rise of Android. So all of us, I think, know this trend, but just to put it in some context, last year in India, Symbian, which is Nokia's OS, their market share was roughly 47%. And if you compare that just over 1 year, it's now at 23% relative to Android, which is now at 50%. By 2015, the expectation is Android's going to be 80% of the Indian OS market. Right now, globally, Android is already at about 70%. The other key thing is device innovations. So this isn't just about smartphones, especially in a market like India, right? So it's not all about, hey, Android, everyone's going to get onto smartphones. There's obviously still a sizable population that's going to be on feature phone for a while. But what's interesting that's happening, especially in markets like India, is there's a lot of device innovation happening. So this example you can see on the screen here is like a dual SIM cell phone. And what it allows from a mobile adoption perspective is for people that are rural or poor or price sensitive, you can have reduced call rates, you have flexibility both in terms of sharing SIM cards with your family and also traveling, and then all in the context of a lower cost device. The other thing that's really helping buoy mobile adoption in India is the data wars. So if you look across all the telcos, actually in India it's probably one of the lowest cost rates that you can find. And so in general, that's been helping drive down prices and then increase the internet adoption as well. On the cloud front, this is an interesting story with India, right? So we all know the stories of a lot of global apps, if you will, that are very popular. Of course, on the social front, there's things like Facebook or Twitter. There's some, very large enterprise kind of apps that are popular, which is things like Salesforce that was mentioned earlier. And what you're seeing is there's starting to become a greater ecosystem within India for Indian-specific content. I wouldn't say it's nearly as advanced to where it could be. There's plenty of opportunities to do more of this. Right now, for example, if you want to get Indian-specific cricket information, you can go to CricBuzz mobile platform or NDTV for news. But when you think about, how do you really drive to that next level of applications that is with Indian relevant content, there's a lot of opportunity there as well. Then again, on the content side, it's not just a smartphone story. There's plenty of opportunity on the low-cost side as well. So how many of you here in the room have heard of Nokia Life Tools? One, few. Probably more of you, I think. So Nokia Life Tools was an innovation that Nokia started, I think, back in 2009. But the idea was, what can you do with a feature phone that could create a utility for the rural poor? So they created a kind of series of applications, if you will, for feature phones that really helped address very acute pain points for the rural poor. So for example, this example you see here is one that was done for an agricultural application. So the issue was farmers had to travel quite far in order to get prices for agriculture, and it took a lot of time and effort, and there was no transparency of pricing. So from an end-to-end perspective, it was a big pain point. So what they did is they created a market price feed so that the farmer, before having to travel miles to go to the central market, they were able to find out, okay, this is what the pricing is for today, much greater transparency when negotiating prices. So there was a whole lot of benefit that came from that. And this is just an example, but what you're seeing is in countries like India, a lot of innovations happening, whether it's on agriculture or education or healthcare, that are trying to serve the more feature phone market. And this is using technologies including things like IVR, which is more voice-based as opposed to having to rely on data. The other interesting trend, I think a couple of folks had mentioned earlier, is mobile banking. What's interesting is the appetite for mobile banking is very high in India. So there's actually a huge opportunity here. So this is just some survey, some research that had been pulled, where the question was, have you used your mobile phone to make a payment in the last 6 months? And for India, about 64% said yes to that. And then similarly for mobile banking, have you used your mobile phone for banking in the last 6 months? And it's actually very high on a relative basis compared to other economies, about 75%. But the key here is, what does the ecosystem need in order to develop this further? You need that compelling user experience that everyone's talked about that really hits against the pain points of what the consumer's facing in terms of payments or banking. You need that payments partner ecosystem, and that's been a huge challenge globally, frankly, to getting mobile payments really accelerated across the board. Then there are other issues, of course, like security that was mentioned earlier, and then also, is there anything that you need to change consumer behavior, because that's always hard. I'm going to share with you guys a survey we did in India of mobile internet users specifically. So you can see from that inverted pyramid, that's a smaller subset, but it gives you a sense of what is the usage patterns that are happening with people that are accessing mobile internet today. First question we ask people is, how do you spend your typical day? So what kind of media do you consume and how much time do you spend on it? So what we found is 5 hours on average of media is consumed per day by mobile internet users, of which 94 minutes is on mobile, not including SMS and calls. So this is them accessing apps or the mobile web. 75 minutes on TV, and then online desktops about 56 minutes. So then what are they doing when they're on their mobile device, when they're spending that 94 minutes on mobile? Well, what you see is whether it's entertainment, getting some sort of information, doing some sort of communication, whether it's for business or personal, or doing some sort of shopping, that mobile is actually the dominant choice across all of this. And this is India-specific numbers that you guys see. We also asked them, how do you get online? So back to that 2013 question of how many use mobile as their primary or exclusive means of getting online. And what we found is 72% of mobile internet users in India said that mobile is either the primary or exclusive means, which is a huge shift from just a few years earlier. So what are they doing? The top 3, and this is pretty consistent country by country, in other markets, is entertainment is #1 at 21%, so people are using it to consume music or videos of some sort. #2 is around social media, so it's a pretty close #2, which is people are accessing Facebook, Twitter, or WhatsApp, or any of these other communications. And then the third big use case is around playing games. And what's interesting is playing games isn't just about kids, teenagers playing games. We've actually found very high correlations between like mobile mothers and those that actually play things like casual games. So there's a very interesting cross-section of the population that do all 3 of these. So where is this going? If you see this chart on the left, this is kind of the growth rates happening on each of the use cases. So the biggest growth expectation in India in terms of what people will consume in terms of applications and content is really around entertainment. So that's #1 by far, and it's expected to grow almost 50%. #2 is around social media. #3 is around sending and receiving emails. And then the rest are things like searching for general information, mobile banking. That's actually showed up surprisingly high in India relative to other markets. So then we also asked people, what is your favorite mode of receiving mobile content in India? And what we found is 47% said they prefer mobile web. It's still a very big SMS market here, so it's about 34% wanted kind of SMS push. And then 19% is apps. Now apps here in India is actually, this is a very, very low percentage. If you look in most markets, it's almost 50% apps and growing. Trend-wise, in India, apps is the one that's growing the fastest, but obviously in order to do apps, it's a tight correlation to also smartphone increase in penetration. And what you see, therefore, as a result, is affluent people in India prefer apps relative to others, which is interesting for marketers to understand. So then finally, how does mobile impact purchase decisions, which is another interesting variable. Obviously, India is a big TV market and other forms of media. And what we ask for mobile internet users, when you're thinking about, making a decision on purchasing, what do you think about? Actually, mobile is #1. So it's about 57% relative to TV, which is a close second at 52%. And then desktop's pretty far behind it, 34%, almost on par with print.